All right, I want to jump right into the story. Jesus has just fed the 5,000. He sent the disciples on a boat onto Lake Galilee. He got away by himself, and they're out at night in the middle of a storm on this boat. And here is the key dialogue that I want to kind of focus on. Peter says, Lord, if it is really you, Jesus, if that's you, command me, call me to get out of the boat, to come on the water and walk with you on the water. And Jesus said, come on, Peter. What is the purpose of this story? Well, there are two reasons. One reason is that this story reveals something to us about Jesus. Second of all, it reveals something to us about ourselves and about the call to follow Jesus. So let's start with the first one. Jesus identified himself. He literally identifies himself with the phrase, I am. That phrase can very rightly be translated, I am he, I am the one, it is me. That's some interpretation. The literal words that we have recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, the Greek phrase is, I am. It's the same phrase in the Old Testament that God, Yahweh, God the Father, uses over and over again as maybe his favorite phrase of self-identification. So Jesus now identifies himself in the same way that Yahweh identifies himself. Yahweh is the one that walks through the water, tramples over the water. Jesus Christ is now declaring his deity. So that's what it tells us about Jesus. But mainly focus today on what this tells us about Jesus' call to us to follow him, to walk with him. The second reason that we have this story recorded for us is to communicate how critical it is for us to trust in Jesus before we are going to follow Jesus. You and I, we cannot follow him unless we first trust in him. Peter walked on the water in the middle of a storm. Jesus was teaching him something. He might not have been teaching him how to walk on water, but he was teaching them how to trust in him, because following him is going to require them to do something that is just about the same. So here's what I want to say to you today, that following Jesus, in a sense, calls us to do something like Peter did here. The call to follow Jesus and literally walking on the water both require supernatural power. So the first point I want you to see today is that in order for us to follow Jesus, we are going to have supernatural power. We cannot do this without him. And here's what Jesus said. He said, with God, all things are possible. Jesus wasn't saying it was not possible. He's saying, from a human perspective, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. The second thing I want you to see from this story is that Jesus does empower us to do what he calls us to do. Peter did not automatically just jump out of the boat and go running to Jesus on the water. The first thing Peter did is he said, Jesus, if that's you give me permission. Call me out on the water. Can I come to you? And Jesus called him. And Peter gets out of the boat and he walks on the water because in this context, in this situation, Jesus said yes. So our job is to make sure that we have a green light from the Lord and we're doing what he calls us to. Because if you're doing your own thing and you're saying, Lord, empower me to do my own thing, God just doesn't work that way. He empowers us to do what he calls us. The third thing today, we need what Peter needed, and that is he needed faith in addition to permission. Right? So we need permission. We need to know, Lord, is this your will? If this is your will, you're going to empower me to do it. But permission is not enough. There are a lot of us that we know what God's will is, but we're still stuck in the boat. What happens is Peter recognizes Jesus. And it's only because he recognized Jesus that there's a switch that flips from terrified to, well, it's Jesus. Jesus' presence is of very little value to us if we do not recognize his presence. So we need to recognize the presence of Jesus in our life. And Peter did. And that's when Peter was able to take the next step. The next step is what confirms our faith. Faith is expressed with our words, but it is confirmed with our actions. So Peter's faith is both heard and seen. We hear it in his words, but then we see it in his actions. Peter gets out of the boat. We demonstrate our faith in Jesus, not just by our words. Jesus, help me. I'm going to follow you. And the good news is when we follow Jesus, and no matter how challenging it is, No matter how scary it might be, when we step out in faith, he does some wonderful things. So we need to step out of our boat. Lastly, faith is not afraid to fail, to fall. He's looking at the waves around him and the wind, and he got afraid. He started to doubt. Oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. What am I doing? I got to get back to that boat. And he begins to sink. And when he begins to sink, though, he did something else that was very wise. He said, Jesus, help me. And Jesus immediately reached down his hand and he grabbed him and he lifted him back up. Okay, can I say to you today that if you have made a decision to follow Jesus, he is your Lord and Savior, that's what Christians do. We follow Jesus. If you have made a decision to do that, can I tell you that invariably, on some level or another, you will fail. We need to have the kind of faith that says, the faithfulness of my Savior is greater than my potential to fail. So even though I might fail in some way, in some manner, some form, my Savior will be faithful to pick me back up when I fail. So what are we going to do today? As the question that confronts us in this story is, are we going to trust in the things that have been made with our own hands to provide our security and to be our sufficiency, or are we going to trust in the one who made man? Are we going to look down at the things that were made by man's hands, or are we going to look up to the one who made man and controls our lives? It's only when we do that that we will have the courage, like Peter, to step out of the boat and follow Jesus and what he's calling us to do. And the rewards will be amazing, because what Jesus is calling you to do, what he's calling me to do, are so much greater than walking on water.